For Lake's trembling fingers had barely touched the bridal veil when her father shoved her toward the chapel doors. "Walk," Chief Bamidele hissed. "Your sister ran away, and this family will not be humiliated because of you." Inside, crystal lights shimmered over a room full of wealthy guests waiting to witness a perfect alliance. But the moment Folake stepped into the aisle in her sister's wedding gown, the groom looked up from his wheelchair, and the air changed. Adewale Akinyemi did not look shocked. He looked furious, because in one cold, devastating glance, he knew the bride before him was not the woman his family had promised him. "Before we go on, tell me honestly, if your own family forced you to marry a stranger to protect their reputation, would you obey, or would you run? And where are you watching from today?" Drop your country and local time in the comments. If you enjoy emotional, dramatic stories filled with shocking twists, justice, and deep healing, subscribe and stay with me. The wedding ended without celebration. There was no music when the guests left. No laughter. No clinking glasses. Only whispers sharp and poisonous followed Folake, like invisible stones being thrown at her back. She sat in the rear seat of the long black car, still wearing the wedding dress that had never belonged to her. Layers of lace pressed against her skin like a punishment. Her hands were locked tightly in her lap, and she did not dare lift her eyes. Across from her, Adewale Akinyemi sat in silence in his wheelchair, one hand resting on the silver armrest, the other curled into a fist. The city lights of Lagos flashed across his face in cold fragments. He had not spoken a single word since the vows. Not to her, not to his lawyer, not to the furious relatives calling his phone again and again. That silence frightened Folake more than shouting would have. At last the car turned through a pair of enormous iron gates. Beyond them stood the Akinyemi estate, a sprawling mansion of glass, stone, and old money. White lights lined the driveway. Tall palms swayed in the night wind. It looked less like a home, and more like a place where people hid secrets too expensive to confess. The car stopped. A footman hurried to open the door. Another moved toward Adewale's wheelchair. Before the man could touch it, Adewale lifted a hand. "No one touches me unless I ask." The servant froze and bowed his head. Folake stepped out slowly, her sandals brushing against polished stone. The wedding gown dragged behind her like a ghost. As soon as she entered the grand foyer, she felt it. Eyes. From the staircase. From the corridor. From the line of servants pretending not to stare. She was being measured already. The village girl. The replacement bride. The humiliation in white. A woman in an elegant jeel came down the staircase with controlled urgency. She had the posture of someone who had ruled this house for years without ever holding legal power. This was Madame Sade, the head housekeeper. Her gaze traveled over Folake's face, then down to the cheap fear trembling in her fingers. "So it is true," Madame Sade said quietly. Adewale wheeled past both women without looking at either of them. "In my study. Now." The words were not loud, but the entire foyer seemed to tighten around them. Folake followed him. The study was dark except for a single green-shaded lamp on a mahogany desk. Shelves lined the walls. Old books, legal files, framed photographs, awards. A portrait of a younger Adewale standing beside an older woman with kind, severe eyes. His grandmother, perhaps. The room smelled of leather and rain. Adewale positioned his wheelchair near the desk and finally looked at her fully. "Who are you?" Folake swallowed. "My name is Folake. I know your name." His voice was calm, but only in the way a blade is calm before it cuts. "I asked who you are." She looked down. "I am Temelade's sister." His expression did not change. So they sent her sister to marry a cripple. The word struck her harder than if he had shouted. She lifted her head quickly. "I did not want this." He leaned back slightly, studying her. No. Then why did you walk down that aisle? Because her father's hand had bruised her wrist. Because her mother had cried more for family shame than for her daughter's life. Because she had been raised to carry burdens that were never meant for her. But none of that would matter to a man who had just been publicly deceived. My father said there was no choice, she whispered. A small, bitter smile touched Adewale's mouth. There is always a choice. Your family simply decided that your dignity was cheaper than scandal. Folake's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. He noticed that. That too seemed to interest him. He turned his chair slightly toward the desk. This marriage should be annulled by morning. Her chest tightened. Then he added, "But it will not be." She looked up in shock. For the first time that night, Adewale's eyes sharpened with something more dangerous than anger. Someone orchestrated this too carefully. The runaway bride, the public vows, the legal witnesses, the pressure to proceed before the press could catch the story. He tapped a finger once against the desk. That means this was not a family panic. It was a plan. Folake stared at him. A plan? Her mind went back to the bridal room. The frantic lies, the sudden urgency. Her father's face not panicked but calculating. Adewale watched the realization begin to dawn in her. You did not know, he said. It was not a question. No, she said. I swear I did not. For a moment the room went still. Then he pressed a button on the desk. A man entered almost immediately, lean and formal, wearing a dark suit. This was his lawyer, Mr. Okon. You will prepare a statement, Adewale said. For now the marriage stands. Mr. Okon blinked. Sir, the marriage stands, Adewale repeated. Publicly, legally, and within this house. Folake turned to him. Why? His eyes met hers. Because if this was arranged to weaken me, I want the people behind it to believe they succeeded. A silence followed. Then he continued colder now. And because if I send you back tonight, they will either coach you, silence you, or use you again. The truth of that settled over her like ash. He was right. If she returned home now, Chief Bamidele would not comfort her. He would correct her story. He would decide what she was allowed to remember. Mr. Okon nodded slowly. Understood. And one more thing, Adewale said. No one in this house discusses what happened today outside these walls. Yes, sir. After the lawyer left, Folake stood motionless near the door. She was still trying to understand what had just happened. She had been dragged to the altar like an offering. Now she was being kept in a billionaire's mansion like a witness. Adewale looked exhausted suddenly, though he hid it well. You will stay in the East Wing, he said. Separate room, separate staff. You will not enter my private quarters without permission. Folake nodded quickly. He studied her face once more. And if you are lying to me, Folake, I will know. She did not answer. Not because she was afraid. Because she sensed he was telling the truth. Madame Sade showed her upstairs. The East Wing felt like another world. The carpets were so soft her steps made no sound. The walls held abstract paintings she could not pretend to understand. The bedroom assigned to her was larger than the house she had grown up in. There was a bed with carved wood and cream silk sheets, a marble bathroom, a wardrobe bigger than a market stall. Folake stood in the center of it all, feeling smaller than ever. Madame Sade remained by the door. You should bathe, the older woman said. Someone will bring clothes. Folake hesitated. Why are they all looking at me like that? Madame Sade's expression did not soften, but it did deepen. Because this house has seen many lies, she said, and it rarely receives innocent people. Before Folake could ask what that meant, the older woman left. An hour later, unable to sleep, Folake stood near the window in a simple robe looking out over the dark gardens below. Somewhere in the mansion, a door slammed. Voices rose, men's voices. She stepped into the corridor drawn by instinct more than courage. At the far end near the private elevator, two figures stood in heated conversation. One was a tall man in his 50s with a polished smile that did not reach his eyes. Kunle Akinyemi, Adewale's paternal uncle. She had seen him at the wedding whispering too much, watching too closely. The other was a bespectacled man in a tailored coat, carrying a leather medical case. Dr. Femi. Folake moved behind a column before they noticed her. He should not have gone through with it, Dr. Femi muttered. Kunle's answer came low and sharp. He already did. Complaining changes nothing. This kind of stress is dangerous in his condition. Kunle gave a short laugh. His condition is the only reason half this empire is still negotiable. Folake's heartbeat stumbled. Dr. Femi lowered his voice even further, but she still caught the words. If he begins improving. He won't. Kunle snapped. Not if his treatment remains exactly as prescribed. Silence. Then and the girl. Dr. Femi asked. Kunle glanced down the corridor. Folake pressed herself flatter against the wall. She is a complication, he said, but perhaps a useful one. A frightened village wife is easy to control. Their footsteps moved away. Folake stayed frozen long after they disappeared. A frightened village wife. Not if his treatment remains exactly as prescribed. Her hands began to shake. She had thought the cruelty ended with the forced wedding. It had not ended. It had only changed clothes. The next morning the house gathered for breakfast as if nothing had happened. Silver trays, fresh fruit, newspapers, crystal water glasses. Adewale sat at the head of the table immaculate in a dark mourning robe, his face unreadable. Kunle smiled warmly when Folake entered, as though he had not spent the night discussing how useful her fear might be. My dear, he said, rising halfway. Welcome to the family. Folake felt the lie in his voice like rot beneath perfume. Adewale's spoon touched the porcelain bowl once, a small sound, but enough to silence the room. Then he looked at Folake, not gently, not cruelly, but with deliberate clarity. Sit, he said. She obeyed. Every eye turned between them. A husband in a wheelchair. A bride who was never meant to be there. A table full of people pretending not to calculate what each of them could gain from this marriage. Folake lowered herself into the chair and understood with sudden, terrible certainty that the wedding had not been the end of her nightmare. It had been the doorway, and somewhere inside this beautiful house, beneath the polished floors and expensive smiles, the truth about Adewale's accident was waiting like a snake in tall grass. By the third day, Folake understood one thing clearly. The Akinyemi mansion was quieter than any village night she had ever known. But it was not peace. It was surveillance. Every corridor carried whispers. Every servant lowered their voice when she approached. Every polished surface seemed to reflect not just faces, but suspicion. Even the silence around Adewale felt guarded, as if this house had trained itself to breathe carefully around his pain. Folake learned quickly that there were rules nobody bothered to explain directly. Breakfast was served at 8 sharp in the formal dining room, whether anyone was hungry or not. The west corridor was for family only. The private garden belonged to Adewale in the evenings. The physiotherapy room had once been used daily, but now sat mostly abandoned, as though hope itself had been packed away and covered in dust. And Folake, though legally the wife of the most powerful man in the house, belonged nowhere. She felt it in the way maids paused before handing her tea, uncertain whether to bow or merely place the tray down. She felt it in the way drivers stared straight ahead when she entered a car pretending not to see the village girl in borrowed elegance. She felt it most in the voice of one of the younger housemaids, a narrow-faced woman named Bisi, who muttered just loudly enough one afternoon. Some people climb a staircase and think they were born upstairs. The other maids laughed under their breath. Folake heard every word. She said nothing. Not because she was weak, because she had spent her whole life learning the cost of answering humiliation with pride when one had no power to protect it. Instead, she folded the towels she had been carrying, placed them carefully on the linen shelf, and walked away. But the words followed her anyway. That evening, Madame Sade found her alone on the back veranda peeling oranges for herself because she could not bear another meal eaten beneath watchful eyes. "You should answer them sometimes," Madame Sade said, stepping into the fading gold of sunset. Folek looked up. Would it change anything? Madame Sade's mouth tightened. No. But silence can also become a habit. Folek stared at the orange peel curling against her thumb. In my father's house, silence kept me alive. The older woman said nothing for a moment. Then she lowered herself into the chair beside her with surprising grace. "This is not your father's house." "No," Folek said softly. "It is just another house where people decide what I am worth." Madame Sade looked at her carefully then. There was no pity in her gaze, only recognition. "You are wrong about one thing," she said. "This house does not decide anyone's worth. It only reveals what people worship." Before Folek could ask what that meant, footsteps sounded behind them. A male servant approached. "Madam, Sir is asking for his evening tray." Madame Sade stood. "Take it to him." The servant hesitated. He asked for her. His eyes flickered toward Folek. Folek froze. Madame Sade turned slowly. "Then go," she said. Folek rose at once, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "What does he want?" A strange look passed over Madame Sade's face. That she said is something nobody in this house knows until they are already standing in front of him. A few minutes later, Folek entered Adewale's private sitting room carrying a tray with pepper soup, herbal tea, and sliced pawpaw. The room was dim lit by warm lamps and the blue wash of city lights through the tall windows. Books lay open on the low table beside him. Files were stacked in neat piles. He sat in his wheelchair near the fireplace, though no fire burned. He did not look up immediately. For a second, Folek simply watched him. Without the sharpness of public silence around him, he looked less like an untouchable CEO and more like a man holding himself together by force. His jaw was tight. One hand gripped the wheel too hard. The other pressed subtly against his thigh. Pain, she realized. He was in pain now. She set the tray down gently. "You asked for me." Sir Adewale's gaze lifted at last. "Do not call me sir in this house." Folek blinked. "Then what should I call you?" His expression did not soften. "My name will do." She nodded once. "Adewale." The name felt strange in her mouth. Too intimate. Too forbidden. He noticed. Something unreadable crossed his face. "Sit." She obeyed, lowering herself into the chair opposite him. For a moment he said nothing. "Then Madame Sade tells me you refused the wardrobe prepared for you." Folek glanced down. She had changed back into one of the simpler dresses provided for her, but still avoided the extravagant jewelry and heavy perfumes the maids had tried to press on her. "I took what I needed." "You are the wife of this house now." She looked at him steadily. "No. I am the woman your family was trapped with." Adewale leaned back slightly. Then unexpectedly the corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "At least you are honest." Folek almost answered, but his hand suddenly clenched harder against his leg. A sharp breath escaped him before he could hide it. She sat upright at once. "Are you all right? I am fine." He clearly was not. The muscles around his mouth had tightened. A sheen of sweat had begun to gather at his temple. His fingers dug into his thigh, as though trying to crush the pain by force. Folek stared. "This happens often." He looked at her coldly. "What concern is that of yours?" She ignored the tone. "Since the accident." His jaw flexed. Leave it. But she was already watching too closely now. The tray, the cup of tea untouched, the medicine bottle near the lamp, the way his leg twitched, not dead and still but tense, too tense. In the village, she had seen old men with crippled joints, women with nerve pain after difficult childbirths. A hunter once kicked by a mule so badly, he dragged one foot for a year. Pain had a language, and this did not look like the pain of a body simply broken. It looked aggravated, provoked. "Did you take your medicine?" she asked. His eyes flashed. "Do not overstep." But she had already noticed the bottle label. Dr. Femi. She remembered the words from the corridor. Not if his treatment remains exactly as prescribed. A small, cold feeling opened in her stomach. Carefully she said, "Would you allow me to bring warm cloths?" Adewale let out a humorless breath. "You think cloth can repair nerves?" "No," Folake said quietly. "But heat can calm what medicine is inflaming." The room went still. He stared at her, not angry now, studying, as if trying to decide whether she was foolish or observant. At last he said, "Do what you want." Folake rose immediately. She returned with a basin of warm water, 2 folded towels, and a small bottle of palm kernel oil she had found in the kitchen stores. The younger staff had laughed when she asked for it. One had whispered that perhaps the village bride planned to season the billionaire. She ignored them. Now she knelt near Adewale's chair without looking directly at him. "This may help. If it does not, I will stop." He gave no answer. Taking that as permission, she dipped the towel into the warm water, wrung it, and laid it gently over his lower leg. Adewale inhaled sharply. Folake's hands paused. "Too hot, no." So she continued, slowly, patiently. The way her mother, before grief hardened her, had once tended fevers and swollen ankles in their village because hospitals were far, and tenderness was often the first medicine poor people ever received. When the heat had loosened some of the rigid muscles, Folake poured a little oil into her palm and began to massage carefully. Not forcefully. Not like a physician proving expertise. Like someone listening through touch. Adewale's breathing changed first, then his shoulders. Then little by little the iron in his face began to ease. She worked in silence for several minutes. Finally he said, without opening his eyes, "Where did you learn this?" Folake kept her voice low. "My grandmother treated people in our village. Not as a doctor. Just because someone had to. She used oil and cloth. She used her hands," Folake said. "And attention." That made his eyes open. He looked down at her, still kneeling by his chair, her fingers moving carefully over a leg the richest specialists in Lagos had handled with sterile impatience and expensive certainty. "Do you pity me?" he asked suddenly. Folake stopped. The question was not casual. It was a wound. She lifted her gaze to his. "No." His face remained unreadable. She added, "I think people around you do something worse." A slight crease formed between his brows. "And what is that?" "They have turned your pain into your identity." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The city shimmered beyond the windows. Downstairs, somewhere in the mansion, cutlery clinked faintly as dinner was laid out for people who had never gone hungry enough to respect food. Adewale looked away first. "Enough," he said quietly. Folake withdrew her hands at once, but when she stood, he did not dismiss her. Instead, he reached for the medicine bottle, stared at it for a moment, then set it back down, untouched. "You said medicine is inflaming it," he said. "I said it might be." "Might." "Yes." He nodded once. "You are careful." Folake almost smiled. Careful people survive longer. That pulled another almost smile from him, small, reluctant, and gone in a breath. Then a knock sounded. Before either of them could answer, the door opened and Dr. Femi stepped inside, carrying a leather case. His eyes moved from Adewale to Folake, then to the towel, then to the oil. Too fast, too sharp. "Well," he said smoothly, "this is unusual." Folake stepped back at once. Adewale's face turned blank again, all softness erased. "You are late." "Traffic was terrible," Dr. Femi replied, though his gaze lingered on Folake. "I came to administer your evening dose." Adewale said nothing. Dr. Femi crossed the room, set down his case, and reached for the medicine bottle. Folake watched his hand, watched the ease with which he held it, the familiarity, the confidence of a man who had never expected to be questioned. And then she saw it. A tiny difference in the capsules inside the bottle compared with the empty blister pack near the lamp, same brand, different shade. It was subtle, almost invisible, but not invisible enough. Her heartbeat quickened. Dr. Femi turned. "Madam, you may leave us." Folake did not move. Adewale noticed. So did Dr. Femi. In that charged second, Folake understood something with terrifying clarity. Whatever was happening to Adewale had not ended with the accident. It was still happening. And now she had seen enough to become dangerous. Dr. Femi's smile remained in place, but something colder moved behind it. "Madam," he repeated more softly this time, "you may leave us." Folake stood beside the tray, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The room suddenly felt smaller, the lamplight sharper. Even the polished floor seemed to reflect too much. She should have obeyed. A new bride, a village girl, a stranger in a billionaire's house. Every instinct she had ever learned told her to lower her eyes, apologize, and disappear before powerful people remembered she existed. But then she looked at Adewale. He was watching her, not with warmth, not even with trust, but with alertness. He had noticed her hesitation. He had seen the warning rise in her face. And perhaps for the first time since arriving in that mansion, Folake understood that silence here was not safety. Silence was surrender. She swallowed. "The capsules are not the same." The words fell into the room like a glass breaking. Dr. Femi's expression did not change at first. Then he gave a small laugh. "I beg your pardon." Folake pointed before fear could stop her. "The medicine in that bottle is a different color from the last one." Adewale's gaze shifted to the bottle in Dr. Femi's hand. Dr. Femi's smile thinned. "Madame Folake, I understand that new surroundings can create anxiety, but medical treatment is not something to comment on simply because capsules appear slightly different under the light." "Then let him see the label," Folake said. The doctor's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Adewale noticed that too. "Give it to me," he said. Dr. Femi remained still for 1 second too long. Then he stepped forward and handed over the bottle. Adewale turned it slowly in his hand. The label had been fixed neatly, professionally. It looked ordinary. But when he opened it and poured one capsule into his palm, his expression darkened. "This is not the dosage you gave me yesterday." Dr. Femi's reply came smoothly too quickly. "The prescription was adjusted this afternoon after I reviewed your pain logs. I did not authorize any adjustment. With respect, sir, you were in no condition earlier for a lengthy discussion." Adewale's eyes hardened. "Then you should have waited." A silence stretched. Folake could almost hear Dr. Femi recalculating. Then he let out a careful breath. "Very well. If there has been miscommunication, I apologize. I will have the pharmacy resend the prior dosage in the morning." "Tonight," Adewale said. "Sir, tonight. Bring me a sealed replacement from the pharmacy. Not from your bag, not from your office." "Sealed." Dr. Femi inclined his head. "As you wish." But as he reached for his case, he looked once at Folek. It lasted only a second, yet it chilled her more than open hatred would have, because it was not anger, it was recognition. The recognition a snake might give to something that had stepped too close to its nest. When the doctor left, the door clicked shut with unnerving softness. Adewale remained still, the suspicious capsule resting in his palm. At last he said, "How did you notice?" Folek exhaled slowly. She had not realized she had been holding her breath. "In the village, medicine does not come easily," she said. "When someone can afford only a few tablets, people remember exactly what they look like." Adewale looked down at the capsule again. "And you assumed he was poisoning me?" "No." He lifted his eyes. "No, I assumed someone who changes your medicine without your knowledge is either careless or dangerous. Neither is safe." For a moment, something like grim approval flickered in his face. Then he closed his fist around the capsule. "You should not have spoken in front of him." Folek's stomach tightened. "Because you did not believe me." His expression sharpened. "Because if you are right, you just told him you are no longer harmless." The truth of that hit her like cold water. Folek took a small step back. "Then perhaps I should leave this house." A humorless sound escaped him. "And go where?" She had no answer. Back to her parents. To the house where Chief Bamidele would force gratitude down her throat for sacrificing herself. To the mother who had watched and said nothing while her daughter was dressed for another woman's wedding. No. There was no home waiting for her outside these gates. Adewale seemed to read that on her face. At last he set the capsule down on the table and pressed a button on the armrest of his chair. Within seconds, Mr. Okon entered. He must have been standing nearby. "Sir." From this moment, Adewale said, "No medication enters my room without independent verification. Every bottle, every dosage, every prescription." "Understood." Mr. Okon straightened. "Yes, sir. And increase private security around the East Wing." Folek stared at him. "Why the East Wing?" Adewale did not look at her. "Because that is where you sleep." The room went still. Mr. Okon glanced once between them, then nodded. "I'll handle it." When he left, Folek remained standing by the chair, her hands clasped tightly to stop them shaking. "You think someone will come after me now?" she asked. Adewale answered without softness. "I think people who build their power on secrets do not like witnesses." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they awakened something else. Not courage, exactly. Not yet. But anger. Slow, hot, and clean. The kind that rises only when fear has already consumed too much of a person's life. She lifted her chin. "Then I will not be easy to silence." That made him look at her properly, and for the first time there was no mockery in his gaze, no cold dismissal, only a long, measuring silence, as if he were seeing her shape more clearly beneath the village dresses and frightened eyes. "You may be more trouble than I expected, Folek," she almost said. "You too." Instead, she lowered her eyes. "I should go." He gave a slight nod, but when she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Why did you help me?" Folek turned. The question was simple. The answer was not. Because she knew what it meant to be trapped inside other people's decisions. Because pain recognized pain. Because everyone in that house spoke to him like a throne or a threat, and she had glimpsed beneath it all a man being reduced piece by piece. She chose the smallest truth she could trust. Because you were suffering. Something changed in his face. Just for a second. Then it vanished. "Good night," he said. Folek left. The corridor outside felt colder than before. 2 security men now stood near the stairwell, speaking into discreet earpieces. Somewhere below, a grandfather clock marked the hour. She walked back to the east wing with careful steps, every shadow suddenly alive with possibility. By morning the mansion had changed. Not openly, not enough for outsiders to notice. But inside the walls tension moved like electricity before a storm. Servants spoke even less. Doors closed more quickly. Madame Sade's eyes missed nothing. Mr. Okon came and went with files tucked beneath his arm. And when Folake passed through the breakfast room, conversation thinned in her wake. Kunla arrived late, smiling. He wore cream linen and expensive confidence. A man accustomed to surviving every scandal because he had helped design most of them. "My dear niece-in-law," he said warmly, kissing the air near Folake's cheek. "I hope you are settling in." Folake forced herself not to recoil. "I am learning. Good, good." He turned to Adewale. "And you, my boy? Better today?" Adewale buttered his toast without looking up. Interesting choice of words. Kunle's smile flickered, then recovered. "Concern is not a crime?" "No," Adewale said mildly. "But performance can be exhausting." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Madame Sade set down a silver coffee pot with steady hands. Bisi, the younger maid, nearly dropped a plate. Folake kept her eyes on her tea. She could feel Kunle studying her. Not the way a relative studies a new bride, the way a man studies an unlocked drawer. By midday, the pressure in the house had become unbearable. Folake escaped to the old physiotherapy room at the end of the west corridor, a place she had passed twice but never entered. Dust floated in shafts of light. Parallel bars stood unused near the wall. A treatment bed sat beneath a white sheet. Resistance bands hung untouched from metal hooks. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and abandonment. Hope had once lived here. Then someone had starved it. Folake moved slowly through the space, running her fingertips over a shelf of old equipment manuals. In a drawer she found folded therapy schedules years old, now written in neat handwriting. Progress targets, balance drills, standing support intervals. On the last completed sheet, the notes changed abruptly. Patient resistant, session shortened. Then pain increased after medication. Mobility regression significant. Then nothing. No more entries. Folake's pulse quickened. She turned at the sound of wheels behind her. Adewale sat in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his gaze moved around the room. "I told them to lock this place." Folake set down the papers. "They forgot." "No." His voice was flat. "They didn't." She understood at once. It had not been forgotten. It had been left open like a wound no one wanted touched. Adewale wheeled himself farther inside his face, unreadable as he looked at the bars, the bed, the unused straps. "They all said the same thing after a while," he said. "That acceptance was healthier than false hope." Folake looked at him. "Did you believe them?" His jaw tightened. "I was in pain. I was angry. And every time I tried, the pain became worse." He glanced at the old therapy notes in her hand. "Eventually, surrender begins to sound like wisdom." The sentence broke something quietly inside her, not because it was dramatic, because it was true. She stepped closer and placed the papers on the bed. "Maybe they were trying to teach you surrender." He looked up sharply. Before he could answer, raised voices echoed from the corridor outside. A woman's voice, familiar, high, emotional, theatrical. Then heels struck marble with quick, urgent rhythm. The door flew open. Temilade stood there in dark glasses and designer silk, one expensive hand gripping the frame, as if she had every right to cross that threshold. Behind her, a servant looked panicked and out of breath. "I'm sorry, sir. I tried to stop her." Temilade removed her glasses slowly. Her eyes went first to Adewale, then to Folake, and her beautiful face twisted. "Still here," she said. Folake went cold. Temilade stepped into the room. perfume arriving before her like a warning. I came for what is mine. The words hung in the old physiotherapy room like poison in warm air. I came for what is mine. Temilade stood in the doorway as if she had never fled a wedding, never vanished while another woman was forced to wear her gown, never traded her sister's dignity for her own escape. She looked flawless in a fitted silk blouse and narrow skirt, gold bracelets glittering at her wrist, her face carefully arranged into the expression of a wronged woman returning to claim justice. But Foleke knew that face. She had seen it since childhood. Temilade only looked fragile when she wanted something. The servant behind her still looked terrified. "Sir, I truly tried to stop her." Adewale lifted one hand. "Leave!" The servant disappeared instantly. Silence followed. Temilade stepped farther into the room, her heels clicking against the floor with theatrical confidence. Her gaze moved over the dusty bars, the abandoned treatment bed, then settled on Foleke with open contempt. "So this is where you hide now?" she asked. Playing nurse, Foleke felt heat rise in her chest, but she said nothing. Adewale's expression remained cold. "You have 1 minute to explain why you are in my house." Temilade drew in a soft, wounded breath, as if injured by the question itself. "Your house, Adewale. I was supposed to be your wife." "You were supposed to marry me," he said. "Instead, you ran." Her lips trembled on cue. "Because I was afraid." Of course, that answer. Simple, useful, designed to make cruelty look like panic. Temilade took another step forward. "You don't understand what happened. Daddy pushed me too hard. Everyone kept saying it was a perfect alliance, that it would save the family, that I had no choice. Then I saw the wheelchair and I panicked. I made a terrible mistake." Adewale's face did not change. Foleke watched her sister carefully. Temilade was performing grief, not feeling it. "I came back." Temilade continued pressing a hand dramatically to her chest. "Doesn't that mean anything?" "I came back because I realized I was wrong." "No," Adewale said. "It means you came back." The words struck harder than shouting. Temilade blinked, thrown off for a second. Then her eyes shifted to Foleke. "And you," she said, her voice dropping its sweetness at once. "You should leave." Foleke looked at her quietly. "Why?" Temilade laughed in disbelief. "Why, because that marriage was never yours." The old wound opened exactly where she meant it to. Never yours, never your dress, never your place, never your life. But before Foleke could answer, Adewale spoke. Neither was the courage required to stand in that aisle. Temilade turned to him sharply. Adewale's gaze remained fixed on her, merciless now. Whatever happened that day, Foleke faced it. You did not. For the first time since entering Temilade's composure, cracked. It was small, just a flicker. But Foleke saw it. So did Adewale. Temilade recovered fast. "You're defending her, I am correcting you." The room tightened. Temilade drew herself up. "You think she's innocent because she looks simple. That girl has wanted everything that belonged to me since we were children." Foleke stared at her. The lie was so familiar it almost made her tired. Temilade had used it for years whenever guilt needed a disguise. The prettier dress Foleke never touched. The praise from teachers Temilade had not earned. The last piece of meat on the plate. The approval of parents who loved display more than fairness. Foleke had always been accused of desiring what she had only been forced to surrender. "She wanted your life?" Adewale asked softly. Temilade mistook the softness for sympathy. "Yes." Adewale looked at Foleke. "Did you?" Foleke held his gaze. "No." Temilade let out a bitter sound. "Of course she'll say that." Foleke turned to her at last. "You ran away." Temilade's chin lifted. "I told you I was afraid. And yet you are not afraid now." That landed. Temilade's eyes hardened. What is that supposed to mean? Folake's voice stayed calm. It means you did not come back for love. You came back because something changed. A strange stillness moved through the room. Temilade laughed again, but too quickly. You really think you understand anything? No, Folake said. But I understand you. Temilade took a step toward her. Careful. Or what? The question slipped out before Folake could stop it. They stared at each other. Sisters, one polished by ambition, one weathered by sacrifice. The silence between them held years. Adewale broke it. Get out. Temilade turned, stunned. Adewale, get out, he repeated. And next time you enter this estate without permission, security will remove you. Her face changed completely then. The wounded fiancé disappeared. In her place stood the real Temilade. Cold, furious, insulted. This is because of her, she snapped, pointing at Folake. She has poisoned you against me. Adewale's voice lowered, which made it more dangerous. Leave before I forget you are a guest. Temilade's nostrils flared. For a moment Folake thought she might scream. Instead, her sister leaned close enough to let her perfume and resentment wrap around the space between them. This isn't over, Temilade whispered. Then she turned and walked out. Her heels struck the floor like tiny hammer blows all the way down the corridor. The room fell silent again. Folake exhaled slowly, only then realizing how hard her heart was pounding. Adewale was still watching the doorway. She came too quickly, he said at last. Folake looked at him. What? She did not return because of guilt. His eyes narrowed slightly. She returned because she was sent or because she heard something worth returning for. The thought slid coldly through Folake's chest. She remembered Kunle's smile at breakfast, Dr. Femi's look the night before, the way tension had risen through the mansion all morning. Temilade had not chosen this timing at random. She said the marriage was never mine, Folake murmured. Adewale turned toward her. Do you believe that Folake did not answer? Because part of her still did. Not the legal part, not the visible part, but the deeper thing beneath it, the right to be chosen to belong to, stand beside someone without apology. She had never owned that kind of place in anyone's life. Adewale seemed to understand her silence. He wheeled farther into the room and stopped beside the parallel bars. His gaze moved over them with old bitterness. Help me up! Folake stared. What help me stand? Her breath caught. Now. She looked at the bars, then at him. Adewale. He cut her off. If they are moving pieces around the board, I need to know exactly how broken they think I am. Fear flashed through her. Not fear of him, fear of hope. Hope had teeth. Hope could humiliate a person worse than despair. Still, she stepped closer. Carefully, she locked the wheelchair and moved to his side. Put your hand on my shoulder. His jaw tightened. I know how to stand. That is not what I said. For a fraction of a second, something almost human passed through his expression. Then he obeyed. His hand was warm and heavy on her shoulder. She braced her feet. He gripped the bar with one hand, the arm of the chair with the other, and pushed. Nothing happened. Then strain flooded his face. His body lifted halfway, shook, then fell back hard into the chair. Adewale cursed under his breath. Folake crouched immediately. Stop. No. You're in pain. I said no. He tried again. This time he rose higher, just enough to clear the chair by inches before his left leg buckled violently. Folake caught him instinctively, both hands gripping his waist as his weight tipped toward her. For one wild second they were suspended there together, his breath hot against her temple, her heart slamming, his body trembling not with weakness but with fury. Then he dropped back into the chair. The room rang with silence afterward. Adewale stared ahead, chest rising sharply. His pride had taken the blow harder than his body. Folek knelt in front of him without speaking. After a moment she reached for the damp cloths folded nearby and pressed one gently against the tight muscles above his knee. He did not stop her. Outside, the sky had begun to darken. Wind gathered in the trees. At last he said very quietly, "Again tomorrow." Folek looked up. His face was still hard, still controlled. But beneath the control she saw it, something fragile and furious, something that had not died, only been buried. Hope. She nodded once. Again tomorrow. That evening the mansion changed for the worse. 3 hours after Temilade's visit. A tray arrived for Adewale's room from the kitchen: light soup, fresh bread, herbal tea. Ordinary. Harmless. Almost routine. But Folek noticed the smell before the servant even crossed the threshold. Too bitter. Wrong. She took the tray from the boy's hands so fast he nearly dropped it. "Who prepared this?" He blinked. "The kitchen, madam. Which cook I don't know." Folek set the tray down and lifted the tea to her nose again. Beneath the herbs sat a sharp, medicinal scent she had smelled once before in the village when a man had tried to sedate a violent patient. Her blood turned cold. Adewale noticed her face. "What is it?" She turned to him. "Don't drink this." The servant's eyes widened. "I swear I brought what they gave me." Folek believed him. That was the worst part. The attack had become bolder. No more subtle changes in capsules, no more careful adjustments hidden behind medical authority. Someone was now confident enough to send danger straight to his room. Adewale's expression darkened to something lethal. "Call Mr. Okon," he said. The servant fled. Folek stood very still beside the untouched tray. Temilade returns. Adewale tries to stand. And by nightfall someone tries again. This was no longer suspicion. It was war. War in a wealthy house did not begin with gunshots. It began with polished lies, lowered voices, and servants who suddenly forgot who had sent them. By the next morning the poisoned tea tray had vanished from the kitchen inventory, as if it had never existed. The cup was gone. The pot was gone. Even the boy who had delivered it had been reassigned to the outer grounds before sunrise. Someone in that mansion was cleaning tracks faster than fear could name them. Folek stood beside the tall window in the east wing, watching the first light spread over the gardens. Her stomach was tight. She had barely slept. Every small sound in the night had felt like a warning. A soft knock came at her door. "Come in," she said. Madame Sade entered carrying a tray with plain pap and honey. Not silver service. Not display. Simple food. Human food. "You did not eat last night," the older woman said. Folek turned from the window. "Who removed the tea tray?" Madame Sade set the breakfast down without haste. "You ask sharp questions for someone who has been here less than a week. Does that mean I should stop asking them?" Madame Sade's eyes lifted to hers. "No, it means you should decide whether you want answers badly enough to survive hearing them." Folek felt a chill move through her. Before she could reply, another knock sounded firmer this time. Mr. Okon entered. His tie was perfectly straight, but fatigue had settled beneath his eyes. "Sir wants you downstairs," he said. "In the study, num." "The breakfast room." Folek frowned. "Why there?" Mr. Okon's mouth flattened. "Because your family has arrived." For 1 second she thought she had misheard him. Then the room tilted. "My family." Mr. Okon gave a short nod. "Chief Bamidele, Mama Ronke, and your sister." Of course, not even 24 hours after the poisoned tea. Not even one full night after Temilade had stormed into the house, claiming what she believed was hers. They had come together now, openly, confidently, like people who believed they still had the right to negotiate over a human life. Folake's fingers curled at her sides. "What do they want?" Mr. Ocon's expression hardened with professional restraint. "I suspect they want to rewrite the story before Sir does." When Folake entered the breakfast room, every instinct in her body told her to turn and walk out again. Chief Bamidele sat near the center of the long table in a dark agbada, his face solemn with the false dignity he wore whenever he intended to wound someone while calling it duty. Beside him sat Mama Ronka, beautiful, and polished, her eyes already wet, as if she had come prepared to perform motherhood. Temilade sat nearest the head of the table in a cream dress that made her look soft, repentant, expensive. Adewale was already there. He sat at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, one hand resting on the arm of his wheelchair, his expression unreadable. Kunle stood by the sideboard with a cup of coffee, smiling like a man attending a theatre performance he had helped finance. The moment Folake stepped in, Chief Bamidele rose. "Ah, Folake," he said, opening his arms slightly as if this were a family reunion and not an ambush. "Come, sit down." Folake remained standing. "No." A pause. It was small, but it landed heavily in the room because people like Chief Bamidele were not used to hearing refusal from daughters they had trained to obey. Mama Ronka dabbed at her eyes. "Folake, don't speak like that. We came because we are worried about you." Temilade lowered her gaze beautifully. "We all made mistakes." Folake looked at her sister for a long moment. "You wore guilt faster than you wore your wedding dress." Temilade's face tightened. Kunle hid a smile behind his cup. Chief Bamidele stepped in smoothly, his voice stern now. "Enough. We are not here to trade insults." "No," Folake said quietly. "You are here to trade me." The truth hit so cleanly that for a moment no one spoke. Even Adewale's gaze sharpened. Chief Bamidele recovered first. "Mind your words. I have done that all my life," Folake said. "It never protected me." Mama Ronka's eyes filled further. "After everything we sacrificed for you," Folake almost laughed. "Sacrificed for her." The cruelty of that sentence was so enormous it nearly collapsed under its own weight. Adewale set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Say what you came to say." Chief Bamidele turned toward him at once, grateful for structure. "Very well. Sir, this situation has become regrettable for all involved. My younger daughter panicked, yes, but she has returned in remorse. It is only proper that the original arrangement be restored before more damage is done." Folake went still. There it was. Not apology, not shame. Arrangement. Restored. As if she were a torn contract to be corrected. Adewale's face remained expressionless. And my wife, Chief Bamidele, glanced at Folake briefly, then away. Folake has done her duty. No one denies that. But we all know the marriage began under irregular circumstances. It would be kinder to release her quietly before gossip spreads further. Kinder. The word almost made Folake sick. Temilade leaned forward slightly, voice soft and wounded. "I never wanted my sister to suffer because of my fear." Folake looked at her. "Then why did you let me walk into that chapel?" Temilade's eyes flashed. "I wasn't there." "No," Folake said. "That was the point." Mama Ronka interjected quickly. "Folake, lower your tone." It was such an ordinary sentence, one she had heard since childhood. Lower your tone, lower your eyes, lower your needs, lower yourself until other people could stand taller without shame. Something inside her did not lower this time. Instead, it rose. "You sold me," Folake said, staring directly at her mother. Mama Ronke gasped as if struck. Chief Bamidele's jaw clenched. "That is enough." "No," Folake said. "Not yet." Her voice shook once, then steadied. "You dressed me for another woman's wedding. You pushed me toward a man you thought was broken because preserving your name mattered more than protecting your daughter. And now that you think the situation can still profit you, you have returned to take back the daughter you value and erase the one you used. The room had gone deathly still. Temilade's face had lost all softness now. Kunle no longer smiled. Even Mamaronka's tears seemed briefly unsure of themselves. Chief Bamidele's voice dropped into its most dangerous register. You forget who you are speaking to. Folek met his eyes. For the first time in her life, she did not flinch. No, she said. For the first time, I remember. A strange silence followed. Then Adewale spoke. Interesting. Every head turned toward him. His gaze remained on Chief Bamidele. You say Temilade returned in remorse, yet she came to my house yesterday before dawn and demanded what she called hers. Temilade stiffened. I was emotional. Adewale ignored her. And less than 6 hours later, someone sent a contaminated tea tray to my private room. Chief Bamidele's face changed by half a degree. No more than that. But it was enough. Folek saw it. So did Adewale. Kunle set down his coffee. Contaminated, that is a serious allegation. Adewale turned to him slowly. Then you should take it seriously. Kunle spread his hands. Of course. I only mean we must avoid hysteria. Hysteria, Adewale repeated. A useful word when men wish to make danger sound feminine. For the first time, Kunle's smile vanished completely. Mr. Okon entered, then holding a slim folder. He crossed the room and handed it to Adewale without a word. Adewale opened it. Folek watched his eyes move once down the page. Then he looked up at Temilade. You said you returned because you regretted running. Temilade lifted her chin. I do. Adewale slid a paper across the table. Then perhaps you can explain why 30 million naira was deposited into an account under your friend's company 2 days before the wedding. An account you accessed 3 hours after you disappeared. Temilade went white. Mamaronke stared at her daughter, stunned. Chief Bamidele did not speak. That silence condemned him more than denial would have. Temilade's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That money was not— Be careful, Adewale said softly. Lies become very expensive when documented. Kunle stepped forward. Now see here, financial movements can be misinterpreted. A young woman under pressure may accept help from whom Adewale asked. Kunle stopped. The room turned on that single unfinished sentence. From whom? Not from panic. Not from love. From someone with interest in the wedding collapsing publicly. Folek's pulse raced. Temilade looked wildly at her father. Chief Bamidele snapped. Be quiet. It was reflex. Brutal. Immediate. And in that crack of anger, the room saw the truth. Temilade had not acted alone. Mamaronke sank back in her chair, hand over her mouth. Folake stared at her parents and felt something strange wash through her. Not triumph. Grief. Because betrayal always hurt twice when it came from the hands that had fed you as a child. Adewale closed the folder. Let us stop pretending, he said. Temilade accepted money to vanish. Your family used Folake as a replacement to preserve the alliance. And someone in my circle expected the chaos to weaken my position. Chief Bamidele rose slowly. You have no proof of my involvement. Adewale's gaze remained icy. Not yet. The not yet landed like a promise. Chief Bamidele turned to Folek, then abandoning softness entirely. Come home. The command was naked now. No guilt, no performance, only ownership. Folek felt the old training tremble inside her bones. Daughter, obey, return, disappear. But beside that old fear stood something new. The memory of a man in pain asking her why she helped him. The memory of a poisoned cup. The memory of herself saying no. She straightened. "I have no home there." Mama Ronke began to cry in earnest now. "Folek, please." Folek looked at her with unbearable calm. "You should have pleaded for me before the wedding." Chief Bamidele's face darkened with rage. "Ungrateful girl." "No," Folek said. "Only unpaid." Temilade let out a harsh laugh. "You think you've won because he pities you?" The insult came like a knife thrown in desperation. Before Folek could answer, Adewale did. "I do not pity her," he said. His voice was quiet, steady, absolute. "I am beginning to respect her. That is why she remains." The room froze. Folek did not move. Could not. Because respect, spoken aloud in front of the people who had spent her entire life denying it to her, struck deeper than praise ever could. Chief Bamidele's nostrils flared. He looked from Adewale to Folek and seemed to understand, perhaps for the first time, that the daughter he had considered disposable was no longer standing where he had left her. He snatched up his cap. "This is not over." Adewale's gaze did not waver. "For you that depends on how much more truth I uncover." Chief Bamidele turned and strode out. Mama Ronke followed in tears. Temilade lingered 1 second longer, eyes burning at Foleke with naked hatred. Then she left too. The doors closed behind them. Silence filled the room. A shattered silence. A dangerous one. Folek stood where she was breathing carefully. Kunle moved first, smile-gone voice measured. "Family matters are always regrettable." Adewale turned to him. "Then regret quietly." Kunle inclined his head and walked out. When the room was finally empty except for Adewale Foleke and Mr. Okon, the lawyer let out a slow breath. "That went badly," he murmured. Adewale's eyes remained on the closed doors. "No." It went honestly. Then he looked at Folake. There was no softness in his face. But there was something steadier now. Something dangerous in a different way. Trust not fully formed, not safe, but beginning. "From now on," he said, "you do not go anywhere in this house alone." Folake nodded once, because after what had just happened, she understood it too. This was no longer a forced marriage hidden behind scandal. It had become a battle line. And now that the masks had slipped, everyone would have to choose what they were willing to betray or protect before the end. After the confrontation in the breakfast room, the mansion no longer bothered pretending to be calm. Something essential had cracked. Not loudly, not publicly, but in the quiet ways that mattered. Security doubled near Adewale's private wing. Mr. Okon began carrying locked folders instead of loose files. Madame Sade dismissed 2 kitchen workers without explanation. Kunle stopped smiling unless other people were watching. And every time Folake entered a room, conversations did not merely pause anymore, they ended. She had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer the accidental bride people mocked behind polished hands. Now she was a problem. That should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, what lingered strongest inside her was something she still did not know how to carry. "I am beginning to respect her." Adewale had said it without softness, without romance, without performance. And somehow that made it matter more. Respect was not the language Folake had grown up hearing. Usefulness, obedience, sacrifice, silence, those she knew. Respect felt almost too expensive to touch. The next morning before sunrise had fully opened over Lagos, a knock came at her door. Folake sat up instantly. She had slept lightly again, waking at every shifting sound in the hallway. "Who is it, Madame Sade?" Folake rose and opened the door. The older woman stood there in a pale wrapper and head tie, looking as composed as ever, though the hour itself felt secretive. Sir is in the physiotherapy room, Madame Sard said. He asked for you. Folake blinked. Now, he said 5 o'clock. Madame Sard glanced at the clock in the corridor. It is 5 o'clock. Folake was dressed and downstairs within minutes. The old physiotherapy room looked different in morning light. Dust still clung to corners, but the windows had been opened. Fresh air moved through the space. The white sheet had been removed from the treatment bed. Someone had wheeled in clean towels, a water jug, and 2 sturdy chairs. Adewale was already there, wearing dark training trousers and a fitted black shirt. His wheelchair stood near the parallel bars. His expression was controlled, but his eyes were sharper than usual. Not angry. Focused. You came, he said. You asked. A faint shift touched his mouth. That is becoming your answer to everything. Folake moved closer. Should I choose a less honest one? His gaze held hers for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he gestured toward the bars. We start there. She looked at the bars, then back at him. Shouldn't a physiotherapist be here? I had physiotherapists, Adewale said flatly. They gave me percentages, caution and surrender. Folake hesitated. And I give you what? He leaned back slightly in the chair. Annoyance. Suspicion. Defiance. A beat passed. Movement. The truth of that settled between them. Folake moved behind the wheelchair and helped angle it toward the bars. You should not do too much at once. His jaw tightened. You sound like them. No, she said quietly. They wanted you to stop. I want you to last. That silenced him. For a moment only the early birds outside could be heard beyond the open windows. Then Adewale placed both hands on the parallel bars and prepared himself. Folake moved to his side. Tell me where to hold you, she said. The question was practical, necessary. Still something changed in the room when she asked it. Adewale's gaze flickered over her face as though he understood exactly how much trust was buried inside that simple sentence. At the waist, he said at last, If I fall, let me fall forward, not back. Folake nodded. He pushed upward. The first attempt was ugly. His arms trembled instantly. The muscles in his neck stood out with effort. His right leg straightened faster than the left, and the left dragged half a second behind, reluctant, angry, disobedient. But this time he did not collapse immediately. He rose, only inches at first, then higher. Folake's hands came to his waist firm and steady, not lifting him, only guiding his balance. Adewale inhaled sharply. He was standing, not well, not cleanly. His body shook with the strain. Sweat appeared at his temple within seconds. But he was vertical, taller than the wheelchair. Taller than the grief that had held him down for months, perhaps years. Folake looked up at him, eyes wide. Adewale. Don't speak, he muttered through clenched teeth. She obeyed. 5 seconds passed, then 8. Then his left knee buckled violently. Folake tightened her grip as he fell forward against the bars, catching enough of his weight to keep him from crashing. His breath came harsh and furious. He did not look at her. Again, he said. Folake stared. You need rest. Again. The word was not loud, but it was the voice of a man dragging himself toward something he had once been told was gone forever. So she helped him reset. Again. The second attempt lasted less time, but looked better. His posture aligned more cleanly. The left leg still trembled, but not with complete deadness. Reflex flickered there. Anger lived there. Resistance lived there. That mattered. By the fourth attempt, Adewale could no longer hide the pain. Sweat darkened his shirt. His breathing had become ragged. His fingers gripped the bars so hard, the knuckles blanched. When he dropped back into the chair, he shut his eyes once briefly, as if forcing himself not to curse. Folake knelt at once and reached for the towel. He opened his eyes. Do not look at me like that. Like what? Like I am breakable. Folake dipped the towel into the basin and wrung it gently. Everyone is breakable. He gave a bitter huff. That sounds like village wisdom. It is. She laid the warm cloth against the tight muscle above his knee. His jaw flexed, but he did not stop her. In the village, she continued, we did not think strength meant never breaking. We thought strength meant what someone did after. Adewale looked down at her, in the pale gold of morning with the open windows behind her and her hands steady against the pane. He tried so hard to conceal, Folake did not look like a frightened replacement bride. She looked rooted, like something difficult to uproot once planted. After a while he said, "Tell me about your village." The question surprised her so much she nearly looked up too fast. She kept her attention on his leg. Why? Because every time you speak about it, you sound less afraid. Folake thought about that. Then slowly she answered. She told him about red earth after rain, about women singing while pounding yam, about children chasing goats between cassava rows, about nights so dark the stars looked close enough to gather by hand, about her grandmother who knew which leaves cooled fever and which roots eased swollen joints, about how poverty made people rude sometimes, but tenderness practical. Adewale listened without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "In my world, tenderness is usually a trap." Folake lifted her eyes. In mine, it was sometimes all people had. The sentence rested between them with unexpected weight. Later that afternoon, after a guarded breakfast and 2 meetings behind closed doors, Adewale asked for her again, this time in the private garden. The garden lay behind the west veranda, enclosed by stone walls thick with flowering vines. A fountain murmured at the center. Frangipani trees cast shifting shade over the path. It was the first place in the estate that felt almost human. Adewale sat beneath a broad umbrella while reading a report. Folake arrived carrying tea Madame Sade had prepared herself. No one else touched it, Madame Sade had said dryly, before handing over the tray. Folake believed her. She set the tea down carefully. Adewale closed the report. "Walk with me." She stared at the wheelchair. I mean, help me out of this thing." Her heartbeat quickened, not from fear, from the dangerous brightness of possibility. Together they moved to the gravel path. He used a polished wooden cane this time. One hand gripped it, the other rested briefly and heavily against her forearm. The first step was rough. The second was worse. By the third, his face had hardened into that cold mask he wore whenever pain threatened to expose too much. But he kept going. Step, drag, step, hold. Folake matched him carefully, adjusting without making it obvious. "You can stop," she said once. "No, you are not proving anything by tearing yourself apart." His grip on her forearm tightened. "Maybe I am proving I am still mine." The words hit her unexpectedly hard, because she understood them too well. She had spent her whole life being used as someone else's solution, someone else's sacrifice, someone else's quiet daughter. Still mine. By the time they reached the fountain, Adewale was trembling with effort. Folake guided him to the stone bench. He sat down heavily, breathing hard. Neither spoke at first. Then he looked at her. "You were right." She blinked. "About what?" "Someone wanted me to accept surrender." His eyes moved to the water. And I almost did. Folake sat beside him, leaving enough space for dignity. Almost is not the same as forever. A slow wind stirred the trees. Then, before he seemed to think better of it, Adewale said, "When I woke after the accident, I did not ask whether I would walk again. I asked who had visited." Folake turned toward him. "My mother was already gone by then," he said. My grandmother had become too weak to travel. My uncle came first, then the doctor, then the board members, then people with statements, signatures, percentages, recovery timelines. His mouth tightened. Everyone came to discuss the future. No one came to ask whether I was afraid. Folake's chest ached. So much of his cruelty suddenly made sense, not as excuse, but as scar tissue. She said the only thing that felt true. You were not frightening because you were powerful. You were frightening because you were wounded. Adewale looked at her then with an expression she had never seen before. Unshielded, not completely, not safely, but enough. Enough to make the air between them change. Footsteps shattered it. Both turned. Bisi the young maid stood near the veranda steps, breathless and pale. "Sir," she said, "Mr. Okon is asking for you at once. There has been an issue." Adewale's face closed instantly. What issue? Bisi swallowed. A bank record was traced. The transfer linked to Miss Temilada. Her eyes darted nervously toward Folake. It leads to a shell company connected to Chief Bamidele. Folake went still. Adewale rose too quickly from the bench, pain flashing across his face. But he did not fall. He was standing. On his own. Only for a second. Perhaps two. But long enough for all three of them to see it. Bisi gasped. Folake stared up at him. Her breath caught somewhere between shock and joy. Adewale seemed not to realize it until the second had already passed. Then the truth hit his face all at once. He had stood. Without the chair. Without the bars. Without collapse. His eyes moved to Folake. And in that gaze there was no suspicion left. Only wonder. And something deeper, more dangerous, beginning to take root far faster than either of them had planned. For the rest of that day, neither Folake nor Adewale spoke about the moment by the fountain. Not directly, but it followed them everywhere. It moved beneath the surface of every sentence, lingered in every silence, returned in flashes whenever their eyes met for too long, and then moved away too quickly. He had stood, only for a heartbeat, only by instinct. But the body did not lie in moments like that. Something inside Adewale was waking up, and everyone around him, friend, enemy, servant, relative, would soon understand it. By evening, the mansion had become a map of controlled urgency. Mr. Okon locked himself in the study with banking records and legal files. 2 independent auditors arrived through the side gate. Madame Sade personally supervised every tray, every drink, every key passed between staff. Kunle remained invisible all afternoon, which worried Folake more than his presence would have. Men like him grew most dangerous when they seemed calm. Folake stood in the corridor outside the study with a tray of fresh tea she knew had not been touched by anyone except Madame Sade. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts were not. A shell company connected to Chief Bamidele. So it was true. Not just cruelty. Not just cowardice. Money. Temilada had not run because she was frightened. She had run because someone had paid her to collapse the wedding at the exact right moment. And Chief Bamidele had known. Perhaps from the beginning. Perhaps before Folake was even chosen as the substitute. The study door opened before she knocked. Adewale sat inside near the desk, the lamplight shaping the hard lines of his face. Mr. Okon stood beside a stack of documents reading through a printed report. "You may bring it in," Adewale said. Folake entered quietly and set the tray down. Mr. Okon looked up. "Sir, should I continue later?" Adewale's gaze flickered toward Folake, then back to the lawyer. "No. Stay." Folake straightened. "I can leave." No, Adewale said. The word was not sharp, but it carried a weight she had started to recognize. He was not keeping her in the room as one keeps a witness. He was making a choice. Mr. Okon adjusted his glasses and resumed. The shell company was registered 18 months ago under the name of a deceased businessman. 2 directors appear on paper, but both identities are fraudulent. The account received several large transfers from firms linked to Chief Bamidele's import network, then paid out to a consulting company used by Temelade's friend, Adaeze Omotoso. Folake felt her chest tighten. She knew Adaeze. Stylish, loud, always near Temelade whenever trouble needed a prettier shape. "Can it be traced clearly?" Adewale asked. Mr. Okon nodded. "Clearly enough to start breaking people." The room went silent. Adewale leaned back slowly, fingertips pressed together. "Not yet," he said. Folake looked at him. "Why not?" He turned his gaze to her. "Because partial truth is a dangerous weapon. If I move too early, they will destroy evidence, align their stories, and paint themselves as victims of a disabled man lashing out in paranoia." The word disabled hung in the room for half a second, not with self-pity, with precision. He knew exactly how the world had been reading him. Weak, unstable, grateful for survival, easy to manage. Folake's voice softened. "You think they are still underestimating you?" Adewale's expression darkened slightly. "I know they are." Mr. Okon gathered a smaller folder from the desk. "There is something else." Adewale held out a hand. The folder changed hands. He opened it, read one page, then stilled so completely that even the air in the room seemed to change. Folake noticed at once. "What is it?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his eyes to Mr. Okon. "Where did you find this?" "In the old estate archive," the lawyer replied. "Locked among your grandmother's private papers. Madame Sade thought it might matter." Adewale looked back down. Then, without a word, he passed the folder to Folake. She took it carefully. Inside lay an aged letter, a notarized family memorandum, and a faded photograph. The photograph showed an older woman seated proudly in traditional attire, stern-faced but warm-eyed. Beside her stood a younger woman Folake recognized with a painful jolt. Her mother. Not Mama Ronka as she appeared now in silk and bitterness, but the younger version of her from years before simple wrapper uncovered hair, uncertain smile. Folake stared. "That's my mother." Adewale said nothing. Her fingers shook as she turned to the memorandum. The text was old, but legible. It referred to an agreement between the late Aya Agba Morenike Akinyemi and the family of Bamidele Alade, acknowledging a life debt after an act of rescue during a road attack many years earlier. In return, Morenike had pledged future protection to the rescuer's household, and if character proved worthy to welcome one daughter from that house into the Akinyemi family as a daughter-in-law. Not the eldest, not the youngest, not the prettiest. The wording was painfully clear. The daughter whose conduct reveals honesty, endurance, and compassion. Folake read the line twice. Then a third time. Her mouth went dry. Adewale watched her. "She never named Temelade," he said quietly. Folake looked at him. The world inside her had tilted again. "All this time," she whispered. Mr. Okon spoke carefully. "Your father likely saw only the alliance and assumed the younger daughter would be preferred once she became the social favorite. But your grandmother's notes suggest otherwise." Adewale reached toward the remaining paper in the folder. "Read the letter." Folake did. It was written in a firm hand. A private letter from Morenike to her grandson sealed years ago and never delivered. She wrote of betrayal hidden inside polished families, of how charm often stood where character should have been, of how wealth drew masks onto faces until suffering peeled them away. She warned him that one day he might be surrounded by people who wanted his power more than his healing. And then, near the end, came the line that made Folake's breath catch. "If ever confusion arises about the promised daughter, choose the one who remains when remaining costs her something. That one will not betray a wounded man." The room blurred. Folake lowered the page slowly. Adewale's gaze had not left her face. "She saw you before I did," he said. Folake laughed once, but it broke halfway into a sound too close to grief. "No," she said. "She saw the kind of daughter my parents never wanted." A long silence followed. Mr. Okon, sensing something deeper than legal strategy now moving through the room, quietly gathered a few papers from the far edge of the desk and stepped back, making himself smaller without quite leaving. Folake stared again at the photograph. She remembered fragments suddenly. Her mother once mentioning an old woman from Lagos who had sent medicine after a flood season. Her father snapping that she should keep quiet about old favors. A visit from a luxury car when Folake was very young, a car that stopped only briefly before leaving gifts, and an envelope no one explained. All those loose memories now rearranged themselves into something terrible and bright. "I was never the replacement," she said. The words came out almost soundless. Adewale answered just as softly. "No." Something inside her splintered, not from pain alone, from release. All her life she had been treated as the daughter people settled for when more desirable options failed. The one sent on errands, the one told to understand, the one expected to absorb what prettier children could reject. But here in this room, in the hidden papers of a dead woman who had judged people not by beauty or ambition, but by what suffering revealed in them, Folake discovered something she had never once been allowed to believe. She had been chosen. Not for display, not for usefulness, for character. Tears rose before she could stop them. She turned away sharply, ashamed of them. Adewale's voice reached her from behind the desk. "Do not." She looked back. His expression was unreadable again, but his eyes were not. "Do not be ashamed," he said. "Not in front of me." The words entered her more deeply than comfort might have. Not pity, not softness. Permission. Permission to feel the full violence of finally being seen. Folake wiped her face quickly anyway. "My father changed everything." "Yes." My mother knew. Adewale's jaw tightened. Maybe not at first, but she knows enough now. Folake lowered herself slowly into the chair opposite him, because her knees no longer felt entirely steady. "He sold Temelade's beauty?" she murmured. "He sold my obedience. He sold whichever daughter gave him the better outcome." Mr. Okon spoke quietly from the side. "People like Chief Bamidele tell themselves they are preserving family. In truth, they are usually preserving status." Folake looked down at the old letter in her hands. If this had been found sooner, Adewale interrupted gently but with certainty. It would still have taken suffering to prove who everyone was. She lifted her eyes. He was right. Without the forced marriage, she might never have entered this house. Without entering this house, she would never have seen the poison in it. Without the poison, Adewale might still have believed surrender was wisdom. Without the betrayal, the hidden truth would have remained decorative and buried. The letter did not erase the cruelty, but it changed its meaning. They had tried to make Folake feel like the mistake in the room. Instead, she had always been the part of the story they needed buried. A knock sounded at the door. Madame Sade entered carrying yet another folder under her arm. Her gaze moved from Adewale to Folake, then to the photograph in Folake's hands. For the first time since Folake had met her, something near tenderness touched the older woman's face. So Madame Sade said quietly, "He showed you." Folake nodded. Madame Sade placed the folder on the desk. "Then there is one more thing you should both know." Adewale gestured for her to continue. Madame Sade opened the folder and removed a brittle envelope. "Iya Agba kept notes on everyone she investigated," she said, "including your father, including Kunle." Adewale's eyes sharpened. "What did she find?" Madame Sade met his gaze. "That years before your accident, she said Kunle and Chief Bamidele had already been meeting privately." The room went still. Folake felt all the warmth drain from her body. Madame Sade continued, voice low and hard. Your grandmother suspected they were planning something involving the marriage agreement and the future control of the company. She wrote that if harm ever came to you, those two men should never be considered separately. For a second, no one moved. Then everything snapped into place with horrifying elegance. The money, the runaway bride, the substitute wedding, the altered medicine, the uncle circling the company. Chief Bamidele and Kunle had not merely exploited chaos. They had built it. Adewale rose too fast from his chair, one hand slamming against the desk for balance. Pain crossed his face, but he stayed upright. Folake was on her feet instantly. Adewale, he looked at her standing now by force and fury, breathing hard. It was never just about humiliating me, he said, or controlling the board. His eyes burned. It was about deciding which daughter entered this house and ensuring the wrong one never had enough power to matter. Folake stared at him, the old letter still trembling in her hand. And in that moment, she understood the full size of the crime against them both. They had not only tried to keep a man in a wheelchair, they had tried to bury the exact woman who could help him rise. By the time dawn rose over Lagos the next morning, Adewale had already decided. There would be no private confrontation, no quiet settlement, no hidden dismissal handled through lawyers and sealed envelopes. People like Kunle and Chief Bamidele survived in darkness because darkness allowed them to rearrange blame before truth could stand upright. If Adewale wanted to destroy what they had built, he would have to do it where power lived publicly. At the shareholders' emergency session, word had already spread through the company overnight that Adewale would appear by remote link to address recent instability involving his health, his marriage, and rumors of financial irregularities. The wording was careful, neutral, designed to lower expectations. Kunle had approved that wording himself. That was exactly why Adewale kept it. Let them prepare for a weakened man speaking from a chair behind a polished desk. Let them gather their sympathy, their false concern, their legal language and rehearsed innocence. Then let them watch the ground disappear beneath them. Folake stood in Adewale's dressing room as Madame Sade adjusted the cuff of his black suit jacket. The room smelled faintly of starch cedar and tension. Morning light poured through tall windows and sharpened every edge in the room. Adewale sat in the chair near the wardrobe, his cane resting beside him, face composed to the point of severity. Mr. Okon stood nearby with a leather document case in one hand and a tablet in the other. The board is fully assembled, he said. Kunle has already arrived. He brought 2 outside legal advisors. Adewale nodded once. Good. Mr. Okon hesitated. There is still time to delay until tomorrow. No. The answer cut cleanly. Madame Sade stepped back. Then at least eat something first. Adewale ignored that. His gaze found Folake instead. She had chosen a simple but elegant deep green dress Madame Sade insisted upon that morning. No glitter, no excess, just dignity. Her hair was braided neatly back from her face. She looked calm from a distance. Only someone standing close would see how tightly her hands were clasped. You can still stay here, Adewale said. This part will be ugly, Folake met his eyes. That is why I should be there. A faint silence passed. He did not argue again. An hour later, the headquarters of Akinyemi Group rose before them in glass and steel shimmering in the heat, like a monument built out of ambition and threat. Security lined the entrance. Assistants moved quickly through revolving doors. Black cars filled the front drive. Inside, on the top executive floor, the air already felt charged. The emergency session had drawn not only board members and major shareholders, but senior advisors, legal observers, and a few carefully selected journalists under confidentiality conditions. Everyone expected scandal. No one yet knew they were about to witness judgment. The boardroom itself was vast and coldly elegant. A long, polished table dominated the room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below. Screens glowed at both ends with financial summaries and agenda items. Bottles of water sat untouched at each seat. Kunle stood near the far end of the room in a navy agbada that radiated old authority. He was speaking in low tones to two directors when Adewale entered. Or rather, when the wheelchair was rolled in. The room shifted instantly. Conversations thinned, then flattened into silence. Adewale sat in the chair expression. Unreadable cane laid across his lap. Foleke walked beside him. Mr. Okon followed with the documents. Kunle's face arranged itself into concern so quickly it would almost have impressed Foleke if she had not already known what lay beneath it. My boy, Kunle said warmly, stepping forward. You should not have strained yourself to come in person. We would all have understood. Adewale's gaze rested on him with perfect calm. That is precisely why I came. Kunle's smile held. Barely. The meeting began. Minutes passed in procedural formalities. Resolutions, introductions, recorded acknowledgement of market rumors. One director spoke about volatility. Another about safeguarding investor confidence. A third offered a polished statement affirming support for Adewale during his personal and medical difficulties. Medical difficulties, personal instability, concern disguised as positioning. Foleke listened and understood something with sudden clarity. Powerful people rarely attacked with knives first. They attacked with language. They made theft sound like stewardship. They made betrayal sound like governance. Then Kunle stood to speak. He moved toward the head of the table with all the composure of a man stepping into a future he had already privately claimed. My fellow stakeholders, he began, voice grave and controlled. We all care deeply for Adewale. No one can question his past brilliance or his place in this company's history. But leadership requires continuity, and continuity requires strength, not merely of mind, but of practical capacity. He paused just long enough. In recent weeks, we have all observed troubling developments. A deeply irregular marriage under public scrutiny, contradictory medical reports, security concerns inside the family estate, financial accusations without formal presentation. He placed a hand lightly against the table. It is my painful duty to recommend interim authority be transferred until clarity is restored. The words were elegant and filthy. A hum moved around the room. Some directors lowered their eyes. Some nodded reluctantly. Others remained still, waiting to see which wind would become safest to follow. Kunle continued, voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. This is not punishment. It is protection. For the company, for the family name, and most importantly for Adewale himself. Foleke looked at Adewale. He had not moved, not even once. Only his eyes had changed. They had gone very still. Kunle took that stillness for weakness. That was his last mistake. Adewale spoke without raising his voice. Are you finished? Kunle turned. For now. Good. Adewale set the cane aside. Then, in one deliberate movement, he placed both hands on the armrests of the wheelchair and stood. The room did not gasp at first. It forgot how. Every face froze. Every calculation halted. A director near the windows actually rose halfway from his seat in shock. One of the journalists let out a tiny, broken sound before remembering herself. Adewale stood. Not perfectly, not without effort, but fully, on his own feet. Tall, hard-faced, impossible. Foleke felt tears burn instantly behind her eyes, but she did not move. Kunle's expression collapsed so fast the mask beneath could not replace it in time. Adewale took the cane, not because he needed to prove helplessness, but because power knew when to use a symbol. Then he stepped away from the wheelchair and walked slowly, visibly, unmistakably, toward the head of the table. One step, then another. Silence followed him like a tide pulling out before impact. When he reached the center of the room, he turned. "I appreciate everyone's concern," he said. "It has been educational." No one breathed. Adewale gestured once to Mr. Okon. The lawyer opened the leather case and began distributing copies across the table. "Since my uncle has raised the issue of clarity," Adewale continued, "let us begin there." Papers slid before stunned hands. Bank transfers, corporate records, medical logs, independent toxicology findings, photographs, internal memos. Adewale's voice remained level. 3 days before my wedding, 30 million naira moved through a shell company linked to businesses controlled by Chief Bamidele Alade. Those funds were then routed to an account accessed by Temilade Alade's proxy hours after she disappeared from the ceremony. Heads turned sharply. At the far end of the room, Chief Bamidele, who had arrived quietly earlier, expecting perhaps to influence the aftermath from behind the line of observers, went rigid in his seat. Temilade, seated beside legal counsel in a pale suit chosen to make her look innocent, turned visibly white. Adewale did not stop. After the public scandal created by that disappearance, Folake Alade was forced into the marriage in her place. This was not a family emergency. It was a coordinated substitution intended to preserve appearances while destabilizing my authority. Kunle stepped forward. "This is outrageous speculation," No Adewale said, and now the steel in his voice cut through the room. "This is documentation." He lifted another file. My private treatment records were altered repeatedly by Dr. Femi Adebayo, who changed medication dosages without authorization. Independent review confirms the substituted regimen aggravated nerve inflammation and delayed physical recovery. A wave of shock moved visibly through the table. One board member removed his glasses. Another swore under his breath. Dr. Femi seated near the back under invitation as medical support stood abruptly. "I acted in your best interest." "You acted," Adewale said in someone else's. Then he turned to Kunle. "And because long betrayals rarely travel alone, let us continue." Mr. Okon placed one final document in front of each board member. A copy of Iya Agba Morenike's archived notes, private meetings, early suspicions, recorded concern over coordination between Kunle and Chief Bamidele years before the accident. Adewale's voice dropped lower. "My grandmother warned that if harm ever came to me, these two men should never be considered separately." Now the room did gasp. Kunle's face hardened into naked rage. "You are standing there because of miracle and sentiment, not because you understand how this company must be protected." Adewale looked at him with quiet contempt. "No," he said. "I am standing here because the people you dismissed as weak refused to let me rot where you left me." His gaze shifted. To Folake. The entire room followed it. She stood beside the wheelchair in silence, hands no longer trembling, every insult ever thrown at her suddenly too small to matter. Adewale held her eyes for 1 second. Then he turned back to the table. "You called my marriage irregular," he said. "You called my wife a complication." His jaw tightened. "She is the only person in this story who did not betray me." Temilade gave a broken laugh that sounded closer to panic. "She's using you." "She always wanted this life," Folake answered before anyone else could. "No," she said, voice clear and carrying. "I wanted a family that did not sell me." The sentence landed like a verdict. Chief Bamidele surged to his feet. "Ungrateful child." Adewale's stare pinned him where he stood. "Sit down," he said, and Chief Bamidele, whether from shock fear or the sudden awareness that the room had already abandoned him, sat. Adewale looked around the boardroom slowly. "You may remove me if you believe I am unfit," he said, "but do it knowing exactly what you are aligning yourselves with." No one moved. Not one hand rose. Not one voice supported Kunle. The shift happened all at once then, as these things do among powerful cowards once the safest side becomes visible. Directors straightened. Legal advisers withdrew from Temilade's side. A senior shareholder cleared his throat and requested immediate suspension proceedings. Another demanded referral to authorities. A third called for a vote on Kunle's removal from interim oversight. Kunle looked around the room and saw it too late. The loyalty he had rented had expired the moment fear changed owners. "This is political theatre," he spat. Adewale took one final step forward, his cane striking the floor with controlled force. "No," he said. "This is the part where truth becomes expensive." What followed moved fast. Security entered, not running, not dramatic, just efficient. Dr. Femi began protesting. Temilade burst into tears at exactly the moment tears could no longer save her. Chief Bamidele shouted about defamation and family dignity. Kunle did not shout. He only stared at Adewale with the hatred of a man whose careful architecture had just collapsed in public. And through it all, Folake stood still. Not because she felt nothing, because she felt too much. Justice, when it finally arrived, was not soft. It was not neat. It tore through blood ties and old fears alike. It did not return stolen childhoods or erase humiliations. But it named what had been done. And sometimes naming was the first true form of healing. When the boardroom finally emptied, when security had led out the loud and the guilty and the trembling, only a handful remained. Adewale stood at the windows, breathing hard but upright. Folake walked to him slowly. Below them, the city moved, as always, cars, glass, heat, ambition, indifferent to private wars. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adewale turned toward her. In his face there was exhaustion, victory, pain, and something that had crossed far beyond gratitude. "I should have seen you sooner," he said. Folake shook her head. "You were not the only one blinded." Adewale looked at her for a long moment. Then, before the empty boardroom, before the city, before the wreckage of everything false, he took her hand. Not as obligation, not as strategy, as choice. And when he spoke, his voice held nothing hidden. "I am not letting you go." In the days after this boardroom reckoning, silence returned to the Akinyemi estate. But it was no longer the old silence. It was not the silence of secrets being protected or fear being swallowed. It was the silence that comes after a storm has ripped the roof off a house and forced everyone inside to finally see the sky. Police inquiries moved quickly once the company's legal team released the evidence. Dr. Femi was suspended, questioned, and publicly stripped of access to Adewale's medical records. Kunle's corporate privileges were frozen before noon on the same day as the shareholders' session, and by the end of the week, every director who had once spoken of interim authority was suddenly eager to emphasize their loyalty to Adewale's leadership. Chief Bamidele's import companies came under investigation. Temilade vanished from public view after 2 disastrous attempts to sell her innocence to the press. Justice Folake learned rarely arrived looking noble. Sometimes it arrived looking tired. Sometimes it arrived wearing legal language and carrying stamped files. Sometimes it arrived too late to preserve dignity, and only in time to expose the people who had stolen it. Still it came, and that mattered. The estate itself changed in quieter ways. The kitchen no longer felt like a battlefield disguised as service. Security remained, but their presence no longer pressed against Folake like a warning. Bisi, the young maid who had once whispered that some people climbed a staircase and thought they were born upstairs, now lowered her eyes whenever Folake entered a room. One afternoon, she even offered tea with shaking hands, and an apology so small it barely had shape. Folake accepted the tea. She did not accept the apology aloud. Not because she wanted revenge, because some lessons had to live inside silence before they could become character. Adewale changed most of all. Not at once, not magically. Healing never moved like stories told by people who had never suffered. There were still mornings when his left leg resisted him, like an old enemy. Still nights when the muscles locked so hard that sweat soaked through his shirt, and he sat gripping the edge of the bed until dawn softened the worst of it. There were meetings that exhausted him, stares that mocked him, and moments when pain entered his face so suddenly that Folake's chest ached to see it. But now there was movement where surrender had once lived. Every day he trained, sometimes in the restored physiotherapy room, sometimes in the garden, sometimes in the long west corridor when rain caged the house indoors. And every day Folake was there, not as a nurse, not as a servant, not as the accidental wife everyone had underestimated. She was there as the one person who did not turn his weakness into a performance and did not turn his strength into a weapon against him. When he shook with effort, she did not praise him like a child. When he failed, she did not look away to spare his pride. When he succeeded, she did not rush to claim credit. She simply stayed. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, they stood together in the garden at sunset. Adewale had walked the full stone path from the veranda to the fountain, with only his cane and Folake's presence beside him. The light burned gold across the water. The frangipani trees carried the faint sweetness of bloom. Somewhere beyond the walls, Lagos moved in restless noise, but inside the garden there was a strange, earned peace. Adewale lowered himself carefully onto the stone bench. Folake sat beside him, not too close. For a while neither spoke. Then he said, "My grandmother was right." Folake turned. "About what that suffering reveals, people?" His eyes remained on the fountain. "I used to think wealth gave me clarity. It did the opposite. It let too many lies dress themselves as devotion." Folake looked down at her hands. "Poverty does that too." He glanced at her. She continued quietly, "Poor people lie as well. They lie about love, about sacrifice, about duty. They call exploitation family because admitting the truth would shatter what little they think they have." Adewale studied her face in the fading light. "You still grieve them," he said. It was not a question. Folake let out a slow breath. "I grieve the parents I thought I had." That truth sat between them, bare and painful. Then Adewale asked, "If they came now and begged forgiveness, would you return?" Folake did not answer immediately. She thought of Chief Bamidele's voice, sharpened by entitlement. Mama Ronka's tears that always came too late. Temilade's beautiful face twisted by resentment the moment charm stopped working. She thought of the chapel, the dress, the push toward the aisle, the years before it, the lessons of obedience carved into her like scripture. And then she thought of herself now, not healed entirely, but no longer willing to disappear to make other people comfortable. "I would forgive what I could," she said at last, "but I would not return to be used again." Adewale nodded slowly. "As you shouldn't." She turned toward him. "And you?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Kunla raised me to believe strategy mattered more than affection. By the time I understood what he was, I had already learned too much from him. He paused. "I do not know if forgiveness is the right word for what I feel. But I know this, I will never again confuse proximity with loyalty." The sentence held more than business, more than betrayal. It held her too. The air between them shifted, not suddenly, not theatrically, like something long forming had finally stepped into the light and decided not to hide anymore. Adewale turned fully toward her. "When I told that room I was not letting you go, I meant it." Folake's pulse changed. She tried for steadiness. "You had just destroyed half your enemies." It was an emotional moment. A brief, startled laugh left him real, this time unguarded enough to make him look younger. "Is that what you think this is?" She met his eyes and lost the safety of pretending. "No," she said softly. A long silence followed. Then Adewale reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Folake froze. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he looked at her with a seriousness that stripped the moment of ornament and left only truth. The wedding in that chapel was an act of violence dressed as ceremony, he said. It used your obedience and my injury and called the result an alliance. His fingers tightened around the box. I will not let that be the only vow our lives remember. He opened it. Inside lay a ring, elegant, simple, with a central stone catching the last gold of evening. Beautiful, yes. But what made Folake's breath falter was not the ring. It was the way he held it. Not like a man displaying wealth. Like a man offering something he understood could be refused. Folake, he said, voice low and unwavering. I am not asking because I owe you, and not because you healed me into gratitude. I am asking because when everything false around me was collapsing, you remained true. You saw the man beneath the title, beneath the rage, beneath the chair. And somewhere in the middle of my healing, you became the place my life began to move toward. He drew one breath. Will you marry me this time by choice? Tears rose before she could stop them. Not the tears of humiliation she had cried in bridal silk that did not belong to her. Not the tears of pain she had swallowed through childhood. These came from a place deeper and steadier. The place where a human being realizes they are being chosen without being used. Folake laughed softly through the tears, one hand rising to her mouth. Adewale. He waited. No pressure. No command, no father's hand at her wrist, no room full of strangers measuring her worth. Just a man who had learned painfully that love without respect was only another cage. Yes, she whispered. Then stronger, yes. Adewale closed his eyes once briefly, as if the answer struck somewhere deeper than relief. When he slid the ring onto her finger, his hands were not perfectly steady. Neither were hers. But sometimes trembling did not mean weakness. Sometimes it meant truth had finally become too large to hide. Their second wedding took place a month later. Not in a Lagos ballroom, not under chandeliers meant to impress people who mistook spectacle for blessing. They married in Folake's village, at first light, under a canopy woven with fresh leaves and white cloth with red earth, still cool beneath people's feet, and birds loud in the nearby trees. The women sang before the ceremony began. Children ran in bursts of excitement until older aunties shooed them into order. Local drummers played not for status, but for joy. Madame Sade attended in deep indigo lace and stood straighter than any socialite in the city. Mr. Okon looked profoundly uncomfortable in traditional attire and endured it with dignity. Even Bisi cried openly at one point and blamed the heat. Adewale walked to the ceremony with his cane. Not hidden, not denied, not dramatized. Folake saw him coming across the village clearing and felt her heart break and mend in the same beat. This was the man who had once sat in a dark room believing surrender was wisdom. This was the man who had learned how to stand again in front of the woman everyone had dismissed. And this time no one was forcing either of them toward the altar. When they exchanged vows, the words were simple. No grand speeches, no performance, just promises shaped by suffering, honesty, and choice. Afterward, when the music rose and the villagers pulled them into celebration, Adewale leaned close and murmured, "This is better than the first wedding." Folake smiled. "That is not difficult." He laughed. The sound moved through her like sunlight. In the months that followed, they built more than a marriage. Adewale restructured the company's charitable arm and redirected a major portion of it toward rehabilitation care, rural clinics, and affordable mobility support for people too poor to receive treatment before pain became permanent. Folake insisted the first centre be built near her home region, where injuries were often left to herbs alone. Not because tradition was foolish, but because modern care had never bothered to arrive. Together they created the Morenike Foundation, in honor of the grandmother whose buried truth had outlived every lie. And slowly, without announcing it to the world, they built a home where neither power nor sacrifice would be used as proof of love again. There were still scars. There would always be scars. But scars were not the opposite of healing. Sometimes they were its evidence. Folake had entered Adewale's life as the woman people called a substitute. She became the woman truth had chosen long before either of them knew it. And Adewale, once reduced by others to the limits of his body, became a man who understood that being healed did not mean becoming who he was before pain. It meant becoming honest after it. Some people spend years believing love means endurance, silence, and sacrifice without limit. But real love does not ask one person to disappear so another can remain comfortable. Real love does not thrive in manipulation, fear, or bargains made over someone's dignity. Folake's story is painful because it reveals a truth many people know too well. The deepest betrayals often come from those who call themselves family. Yet her journey also shows something stronger than betrayal character. Beauty faded, power shifted, lies collapsed. But the one thing that kept standing was the quiet strength of a woman who remained honest when honesty cost her everything. Adewale's healing also teaches something important. The body is not the only thing that can be wounded. Pride, trust, and hope can become crippled too. And sometimes the first step toward recovery is not medicine or money, but being truly seen by someone who does not reduce your pain to weakness. Justice may come late, truth may stay buried for years, but what is false cannot remain hidden forever. In the end, those who build their lives on greed and betrayal are trapped by the very harm they create. And those who choose truth, even trembling, give healing a place to begin. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments, do you believe love can truly heal what betrayal tried to destroy? And where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time below. If you enjoy emotional, dramatic stories filled with deep twists, justice, and healing, subscribe, and stay with me for more.